Welcome to the Temple of Surf, the podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something close to my heart. We just launched the Temple of Surf apparel line. T-shirt, hoodies, caps and more, all inspired by the spirit of surfing and the stories we celebrate here. And if you have little ones who love the ocean, don't miss out our children book series available now on Amazon. Fun adventure about surfing, friendship and the sea. By supporting the books and apparel, you're also supporting the podcast and helping us to keep the surf culture alive for future generations. Mahalo! Welcome back to the Temple of Surf, the podcast. Today's episode is a special one. I'm really happy to welcome Andy Martin, a professor, author, and one of the most thoughtful voices in the world of surf writing. Andy has spent years exploring surfing not just as something we do, but as something we think about, write about, and try to understand. His work sits right at the intersection of surfing, literature, culture, and philosophy, and offers a perspective that feels increasingly rare in a world driven by clips, performance, and speed. Many of you will know Andy for his book Surf, Sweat and Tears, The Epic Life and Mysterious Death of Edward George William Omar Dearest, where he looks at how surfing has been portrayed through words over time, from myth and romance to obsession, realism, and contradiction. What I love about his approach is that he treats surfing as a cultural language, something that reflects who we are, how we live, and how we relate to freedom, risk, and the ocean. In this conversation, we talk about surf literature, storytelling, and why words still matter in surf culture. We discuss the difference between surfing as spectacle and surfing as experience, how writing can deepen our relationship with the ocean, and what surfing reveals about modern life when you really take the time to look at it. This episode is for surfers who like to think as much as they like to ride waves, for readers, writers, historians, and anyone who feels that surfing is about more than just what happened on the face of a wave. So take your time with this one, slow it down, and enjoy a thoughtful conversation with Andy Martin. Welcome to the Temple of Surf, the podcast. Welcome, Mr. Martin. Welcome to the show. Where are you today?
Where am I? I'm in London, East London, Hackney, as a matter of fact. Not very good for surfing. Although, having said that, there is talk of installing a wave pool in East London, which would be very cool. Take a while, but still.
Yeah, of course, it will take a while, but is that a solution that every big city will adopt sooner or later because of also the money, of course, that is potentially there, to be made out of the surf pool, but as well also the sense of community that goes around the surf pool.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of frustrated potential surfers in London, for sure. Actually, there'll be big demand if this ever opens. I hope it does.
Really? Yes. I hope it does too. And I'm sure it's going to be fully booked. And as well, with the surf pool. It's a huge topic per se, the one of surf pool, but there will be a lot of people that can access, to the sport of surfing and as well change the sport of surfing of what we see it today. In kind of looking, let's say, at the X Games of snowboard, for instance, and the evolution that the X Games they have done, on the snowboard or skateboard. And having a perfect wave for surfer can lead to a fantastic maneuver that today maybe we cannot even dream about, right? And
ready to perform those amazing maneuvers at any time. Yes, please. Let me add it. The perfect wave. Yeah, we've always dreamed of that, have we not?
Exactly. It's a bit scary that we can control a wave in the sense that a wave should have his own path, his own life, right?
Sure.
But that's the ocean, and in a pool, it's kind of different. But yes, because it's so perfect, people already expect what will happen into the wave.
Well, I don't see London displacing Hawaii anytime soon, or Nazare for that matter. But it'll be a good. It's like going to the gym or something, isn't it? It'd be good training.
Exactly, definitely good training. Well, yes, it was not my intention to talk about surf pool with you today, but since anyway we were there, we started talking about. But there is a question that I ask everyone on the show. In your opinion, what is the most important thing in surfing?
Okay, I'm going to make an analogy here with learning a language because, taking up surfing is a little bit like learning a foreign language, or at least it was for me. I mean, I think some people, perhaps born in Hawaii, for example, become fluent at a very young age. And whereas I didn't become a decent surfer till I was in my 20s. So that's completely different. So it was learning a second language. And the thing that the founder of a big language learning app told me was that, a study had been done in fact, it was done by the US Army, who were trying to get, some of their troops to learn languages and trying to work out who were most capable of learning another language, or what was the chief criterion for learning another language. And it turns out to be the willingness or the ability to look and sound very stupid, like a complete simpleton, to be an idiot and to live with that. I think that applies to surfing as well, because although one aspires to being a sort of godlike figure on the wave, to, literally walking on water, the scope for disaster and stupidity and the appearance of complete idiocy is always there. And so the most important thing in surfing, I think, is is twofold, if I can. So it's sort of dialectic between the desire, that ambition, that aspiration, and which is sublime, and then the ridiculous, the willingness to embrace the ridiculous as well.
In surfing, there is the word of cook, right?
Mm-hmm.
We never stop being a cook until somebody else tell us that we are not cook anymore. Right? In our mind,
yeah,
we already project ourselves as like the best surfer that we could be, even like the way we catch the first wave, right? But other people might refer to us like cook maybe all our life, because the way we behave on the water, the attitude that we have outside the water, positive or negative.
Yeah. And I'll give you another answer to your most important thing in surfing as well, which is the fantasy or the myth, really, because I mean, I guess that on the one hand, it's real, and we're, grappling with the awkward reality of tons of water, trying to get on top of it rather than the other way around. But the sort of visions that one has, I guess, of how good it could be, I think that very often drives us on, sort of very often despite the realities, I guess, actually. So it's the dream, the fantasy. I mean, I was I've sort of traveled around and I come back to London, but I was born in London. And, my surfing, the origin of surfing for me was the dream of a giant wave sweeping up the River Thames and drowning most of London, in fact. And I would surf away on a passing tree or, door or something like that. I always imagined that I would survive, even though, friends and family would not. And so that vision of the giant wave, almost apocalyptic, but nevertheless, surviving, I think was probably still in the back of my mind, most of the time.
I mean, I don't know what to say. It's a little bit, it's apocalyptic for sure. I also said because you're surviving, your family is not surviving, which, it's very sad. But, there is one surfer, Felipe Pomar, I think is now 92, 93 years old, that he was able to surf a tsunami wave, at least.
Oh, was he? Right, because I gather that's pretty difficult. I think that has happened once or twice, but okay, that is a rarity, I think.
Definitely.
Such a great slab of water, but
I spoke with him and he said, like, the moment that everybody, they were like calling out all the people to go back to the shore or to the land, at
right. Yeah.
safety, he with one friend, he paddled out and he surfed the tsunami wave. And
Wow.
I don't know how big was that tsunami wave, like was maybe one of the first ones or not the biggest one, I guess, because tsunami wave destroys everything. But
Sure.
when you were talking about surfing that wave on the river Thames in London, I had straight in my mind when I was discussing with Felipe Pomar about the tsunami wave. And wave can be very powerful without destroying
Yeah.
half of the city.
On hope so. Of course, it can destroy the surfer as well, for sure, if you get in the way of it too much. And I suppose it's that kind of dark side of surfing that partly drew me to it, actually, to some extent. And the kind of dark fates that overtook a lot of surfers, really. I mean, I got into it through writing and culture, I suppose, as much as the desire to physically surf. I was really interested in what other people were doing. So there was a kind of anthropological thing there, or well, I started off as a surfing correspondent. That's what took me to Hawaii back in the day. So yeah, so I was always interested in that kind of, the collective side of it, what drew people to it, as much as, becoming the fantasy of becoming world champion professional surfer myself. Yeah, but I was very happy to write about. But my era was actually, I mean, this is going back into history books for most people now. Martin Potter, back in 1989, I think it was, became world surfing champion. And he was actually a Brit, although he'd been brought up in South Africa and then Australia. But his origin was British, and he carried a British passport. And that he became my passport, effectively, to Hawaii, because that was where the the Triple Crown and the climax of the ASP year was taking place, and that's how I got to be sent to Hawaii to cover that story.
Nice, very interesting. Well, also trying to connect the dot between your story and also what we said before. I think it was Mark Fu that said that if you want to be like the best surfer or the ultimate surfer, you have to be ready for the ultimate sacrifice.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Fu that I got to know quite well in Hawaii was that, I mean, he really believed that, but also he was a, can I use the word hype without being unfair to him? Actually, he was a great, mythologizer. So thus he mythologized his own death before actually dying. So he prophesied his own fate, and so he had that kind of prophetic oracle type quality. And I think one reason I was drawn to Mark Fu is that he was a writer as well, actually. I mean, he wrote loads of stuff, and I mean, he was very he was very driven by magazines, surfing magazines back in the day, especially, Surfing and Surfer, and always dreamed of, getting a front page, which he did, but also, wrote for them. So he was one of those surfers who not only was very good at surfing, of course, big wave surfing specifically, but also was very good at writing about the experience. And also, one has to say, selling himself. This is what led to the great rivalry between Mark Fu and Ken Bradshaw that I wrote about in was my second book, Stealing the Wave. Battle to the death in some sense. Bradshaw being very anti-hype, but quietly a bit of a hype artist himself in a different way. But that was one of the great defining struggles of my time in Hawaii, I guess, but largely back in the 90s. Yeah.
I think, it's very interesting. And I promise I will read this book because already it's super interesting. Oh, yeah, because...
Sandro, you don't have to. It's great. But, it reminds me of the time in Hawaii. I mean, because Hawaii, you've got to remember, is very poised between, it had I like to imagine that Hawaii had a brief kind of literary flowering, but it had a long pre-literary period, as it were, the oral culture of Hawaii. And now I would say it's post-literary as well. I mean, I remember one funny time when I went back to Hawaii, I'd written a book about surfing in Hawaii, kind of, walking on water, which is sort of anthropological in a way, but a bit of reportage. And one of the great surfers out there and said, "Oh man, I really loved your book." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." And he said, "Can you tell me what page I'm on so I can read that?"
Okay.
Okay, I get that. I mean, he was busy surfing. He didn't have to read. So look, I allow that completely.
It's okay, like I think for somebody it's like, oh, no, I concentrate only on the part that talks about me,
Yeah.
It's selfish, but I think
Yeah, I understand that.
that's the idea. There are more better things to do than the reading. For them, maybe it was better to be outside surfing and dedicate all the time there. Straight to the point. Let's call it like that. Straight.
Yeah. It's a question of priorities, isn't it?
Exactly. Totally. No, I think that I like this fact of having in the book 1 year of North Shore, like Ken Bradshaw, and you have Mark Fu. That, as you said, it was kind of not visualizing, but
prophesying. Right? Yeah, prophesying. Yeah, I mean that. I like both of those guys. And I used to say that of the two, Mark Fu was the easiest one to interview, particularly when he was dead. But Bradshaw was a tough cookie. And I mean, I like coming at it as a reporter, which I was most of the time in Hawaii. The thing about Bradshaw was that, he had this kind of aggressive style. I mean, he was a bouncer in a nightclub down in Honolulu some of the time. And his dad, if I remember, was a sheriff. And he had something like a combination of sheriff and bouncer attitude to surfing, at Waimea, like, I own this place, don't get in my way. And so he's the only guy still to this day that I knew who would actually take a bite out of your board if you got in his way. I mean, literally bite it with his teeth. Wow. And which you would think is pretty difficult, wouldn't you? But he actually showed me how it was done at one point, and he said it's all a question of getting the board at the right angle. But he must have had a very strong jaw.
Definitely. So here we're talking about big wave surfers.
Yeah.
Of course, like you need to have something else than just like being a great surfer to be out there and to challenge yourself with these big monsters. You have to have a charisma that is not common. Okay, of course, fearless in any case. You can be fearless, convinced, or more like what's the movie? Lethal Weapon, when there is like the kind of the desire, to chase, and to chase that in a certain way, and to face that in a way without willing to die, but just like a challenge,
Yeah,
and
sure.
if we move forward to the era of today, big wave surfer, with the Nazare wave, the Jaws wave, the Maverick wave, it's fantastic what these people can do out of their own inner fire, and each one of them is different, has its own charisma and character and the way of dealing with this big wave in a different mood. For some of them, it looks like they are just like, it's the simplest thing in the world, right? Look at Kai Lenny. He's a fantastic big wave surfer and it makes it look so easy while it's not. So I'm glad that you had the opportunity to be in Hawaii and to witness that in first person, because very few people can say that they had the opportunity to be there, and you were there. So,
well, I guess I was, not only witnessing very, very good surfers who were alive. But, there's a kind of deep backdrop in surfing, isn't there, of sort of myth and legend and history, really. So, the surfing contest that I think of as being, defining. I mean, I think now a lot of surfing is, surfing contests sort of setting aside ASP, defined by, photography or by videos. I mean, who's got the best video of the biggest wave and so on. But certainly, in Hawaii, the surfing culture was all about, previous heroes, as it were, particularly, those who had not survived. So Eddie Aikau was probably the biggest hero, and who was not around. I mean, he was kind of my hero to some extent. Hawaiian surfer, of course, who died rather tragically, but also a not only surfer but waterman, as they say in Hawaii, very adept in all sorts of ways in the water, and a lifeguard at Waimea Bay, who then died trying to save others. But the legend of Eddie Aikau, of course, underpins what to me was the greatest surfing contest, the Quicksilver big wave contest at Waimea Bay, in honor of Eddie Aikau.
Definitely. And
you might remember where the minimum was, it had to be 20 foot all day long. When you compare that now with somewhere like Nazare, floating on 80 foot, but also 60 foot regularly, it doesn't seem that great. But it was such a huge, it was such a great arena, I suppose, actually, Waimea, and it had this great kind of resonance to it. And the contest, even especially perhaps when it didn't actually take place, and it didn't take place every year, was a great kind of focal point for everyone. So, in Hawaii, at a certain point, all kind of big wave conversations came back to, the Eddie Aikau contest.
Well, definitely. I think Waimea Bay Wave, has a legacy per se, right? We talk about surfers that have, they project their own legacy because of their story, tragic or inspiring, depends on how we see it, and or both actually. And if we talk about Waimea Bay, it's one of those waves that it's iconic, from the time of beginning of surfing, Greg Knoll, and then Eddie Aikau, and of course the Quicksilver Eddie Aikau competition. Okay, that basically. There is also a myth, or a legend, let's say, into the contest that says that Eddie chooses from above which, with what wave, is going to be the most successful one, Sorry, the one that will crown the champion,
Right.
And I think it's important, to have is Eddie that chooses from above who's going to win the contest. And it's a myth, it's a legend, it's a legacy. It's more than that. It's everything altogether, but it's a part of our surf culture that is so rich, right? And has a lot of facets, and you can turn it like a diamond around, and you have always something new, something interesting that pops up. And I think maybe is this what inspired you to write surf books, no? Because
yeah, the idea that it was like an alternate religion, and that there's an element of destiny deciding for you whether you're going to be a hero or just another dead one, or just a complete failure. Yeah, so there's a strong kind of element of chance in it, which is so interesting, I think. But I suppose it's the sort of the idea that surfing represents a kind of utopia, an ideal, a way of living, a lifestyle, I guess, actually, but also, especially places like Hawaii, some kind of paradise, which obviously is a fantasy, but is a fantasy that, drives people. So one of my kind of heroes, or one of my, certainly the protagonist of one of my books, Ted Deerhurst, the book that you picked up, was driven by that kind of ideal to become a rebel, because there's a rebel element in surfing as well, actually. Almost like being a sort of wizard in Harry Potter, and everyone else just doesn't have that kind of magic, that magical power. So I think that kind of, embodying that magical power was something that drove Ted Dearhurst in particular. And I always used to admire his ambition, as well as a slight sense of, disappointment at never quite attaining that, or, going to paradise and finding that, it was full of snakes. And that kind of, rather complicated story, behind, the beautiful images or, the wonderful video of surfing a giant wave, great, brilliant, ultimately boring to me, unless there's a good story behind it of, which is to do with an individual struggle, courage, as you say, and perhaps that is the most important thing about surfing. Ultimately, the courage that it takes, and the skill, of course, all of those things are in there, as well as the willingness. And probably I was thinking of Ted Dearhurst here, the willingness to be a complete klutz some of the time when it all goes badly wrong. So I think there's a narrative for me in this. It's the narrative of surfing that I guess drove me on, the fabulous ideal and then how it all goes wrong. Yeah. So the image of perfection and then the dark side that goes with it. So it's that kind of, complexity, which I found super interesting about surfing.
No, it's totally interesting. And, of course, if there are stories to discover and story to tell, it's fantastic because, from a surfing act that is common to millions of people,
yeah,
and into a story of a person, and he was it was coming from a wealthy family, right?
Right. Yeah, sure. But broke with that. Yeah. So he could have, or he was, as it were, destined to become Earl of Coventry, I think, and his father was Earl of Coventry. But he broke away from all that, which is so interesting and admirable, actually. Wanted to break with establishment. And I suppose I sort of felt that all surfers are a little bit like that, trying to break with, I don't know, tradition in some way. Of course, there's an alternate surfing tradition, needless to say, but to break with the centers of power, to break with, the patriarch, as it may be, or in this case, the British aristocracy. And so Ted was trying to sort of saw surfing as a way out, as a form of escape, I suppose, actually, or an alternate world to the world he'd been brought up in. So, he was taken from, this country estate in England to the west coast of the States, to Santa Monica, in fact, actually. Literally taken there by his mother, aged about, 6 or 7 or something like that, or 10 maybe, forgotten now, when she broke up with his father. And so he was transplanted to the West Coast, which is where he was taken up by Tony Alva, the skateboarding legend, but also very good at surfing. So they were the same generation. And Alva introduced him to surfing, and then surfing became his passion and his religion, as it were.
Hi, we'll get back to the conversation in just a moment, but I would like to remind you that the Temple of Surf is more than a podcast. We created an apparel line inspired by surf culture, from tees and hoodies to caps, so you can carry the spirit of the ocean wherever you go. And if you have kids, check out our surf-inspired children book series on Amazon, fun stories that bring the magic of the sea to life for young readers. By supporting these projects, you're helping us keep surf culture alive and growing. Now, let's get back to the show.
I tell you why someone like that really interests me. If you compare with Kelly Slater, okay, because I'd written quite a bit about Kelly Slater, and that because as a reporter, okay, Kelly Slater, who won the World Championship 11 times, was it, or more than that? I've forgotten now. But one was often writing about Kelly Slater because he was winning everything. And, I tried to write about Ted Dearhurst and say, but he hasn't won anything recently. No, he hadn't. But the thing about Kelly Slater, which brilliant surfer and a very wise guy in many ways, actually, having met him once or twice. And back in the day when he had hair as well, I was once mistaken for Kelly Slater. That's
okay.
That's only on the beach, not actually on a wave. So that I should make that clear. But anyway, so I feel a certain bond with Kelly Slater, actually. We're probably the same generation or similar anyway. But the trouble for me specifically me only with Kelly Slater, is that he's a great surfer. And I ran out of things to say about great surfers, if you like. So the thing that attracted me, because, it's like he's nothing but a surfer. It's surfer through and through. Whereas someone like Ted Deerhurst was kind of a bit messed up, not quite such a great surfer, it had to be said, but also he was a surfer and not a surfer simultaneously, and had all sorts of strange, ideas in his head that he was, reliving. So his charity was called Excalibur, and he always thought of himself as a sort of knight of the round table. He had that in his head. So there was that myth in particular. And then he was the only guy, I don't know if this is probably not very widely known, but he was the only surfer that I knew in the middle of one of the Triple Crown contests at Pipeline in particular, this was, who in between heats would be reenacting battles from the Second World War using toy soldiers and tanks on the beach, to, I literally, I swear that is, and in order partly to motivate himself. So he was seeing himself, and indeed he compared himself at a certain point to Churchill, Winston Churchill, leader of Britain in the Second World War. Partly because Churchill had an American mother and an English father, which is what he had. So he saw himself in those terms, and often was reading Churchill's history of the English-speaking people when he was not reenacting battles of the Second World War. So he had this whole kind of, persona, or series of personae, I guess, that he was trying to sort of reenact or live out through surfing. Yeah, which I thought was, narratives, as it were. So there was always a narrative for him in surfing, and I guess that beyond surfing itself, or embodied by surfing. So that was always a great story for me.
I think totally. I think for sure. I wonder what was going on what were people thinking when they were seeing like a surfer that is competing on the Pipe Master, playing with the little soldiers and definitely is a one of a kind. Yeah.
Yeah, no other surfers would do. I don't think Kelly Slater was doing that, for example, actually. But it sort of drew me to him, actually, I must say. Yeah, because he had something else going on.
There is this story that Kelly Slater, I don't know, I heard in some podcast, Kelly Slater, before the heat with his adversary, was going and looking at him with his intense eyes, and
right.
Get into the mind of the...
Trying to psych him out.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
While on the other side, you had one guy that is playing with the little soldiers, Right. It might be also a counter strategy of saying, okay, this guy is completely not and is going to be like... I don't know what to expect, on the...
Yeah. It was a strategy that didn't work very well for Ted Deer. So I remember going to one of those dinners. I wonder if they're still happening. I've lost track, but they used to have some great at the ASP at the end of the surfing year would have these great dinners at what was that? Some Pink Palace in Honolulu, anyway, and wonderful occasions, and everyone would gather together, and actually surfers would dress up, which happens so rarely. Occasional tuxedos you would see, and surfers they would still be in shorts, but they would sometimes be wearing bow ties and dinner jacket. It was kind of fun, but and awards were handed out. Surfer of the Year, Martin Potter, and so on back in the day, and or Kelly Slater, of course, many times. But I remember bumping into Ted Deerhurst there, and he'd just been in the rankings. I think he'd come in around 100 and something in the world that year. And he was a bit disappointed. So and he'd come up with a great plan, an alternate plan to go snowboarding instead. And I said, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, okay, good plan. And have you done any before?" He said, "No, but what's the worst thing that can happen? At least you can't." Yeah, that's right. At least you can't drown up That's right. You can't drown up a mountain.
Yeah.
And then the next time I saw him, he was in this kind of iron cage, which was holding him together because he had gone off the edge of a mountain into an abyss somewhere and injured himself so severely that he had to be screwed back together. But he had the vision. Yeah, he bumped up against the reality, sadly. And and also in Hawaii, because he died young, age 40, and was, I think, killed, murdered, in fact, on the North Shore, because, there is this great, the reality is of, the trouble with paradise is that all the bad guys go there. That's what you bump into.
That's actually the mystery of his death, which we don't know. I was reading there was a heart attack, but of course you're saying is
that's all wrong. Robert Bartholomew thought he died on a big day at Waimea Bay, in fact, and that was all wrong as well. So
there is like a surf movie that, of course, is called Point Break.
Yeah,
and of course there is the last wave, and you have Patrick Swayze, that is.
You're talking about Patrick Swayze's final wave where
And so he goes for the wave, and then there is like, what's the name? Kenny Reeves that says he will never come back,
right, yeah.
And the people have the perception that body, Patrick Swayze, died on that wave.
Right, yeah.
And recently, talking with some of the actors that were part of the movie,
all right, yeah,
they told me that in effect, Patrick Swayze's body never died on that way. He survived. Right. And they were planning to do Point Break #2.
Oh, they were, right.
That he survived that wave, and then he moved to Bali or someplace in Asia.
Right. Right.
Different story.
That was going to be the sequel. What happened to the sequel? And then Keanu Reeves would have had to have tracked him down. That seems completely logical to me, because I remember speaking to the guy who actually was Swayze's stunt double for that, and he said it was so ridiculous. I mean, he was very scathing about Hollywood, shall we say, which is a bit unfair because they were paying him. But anyway, he felt that it was so ridiculous to say, oh yeah, there's like a wave that comes around once every 50 years, because he reckoned it was only about 18 foot, Waimea Bay. He said it wasn't even 20 foot, and that he had difficulty falling off the wave and then that several times, moreover. Yeah. And I think, did they mention, because you were actually interviewing the guys who shot it, that they because having looked at it, they obviously slot two waves together, because one wave's a left-hander, the other's a right-hander. They slot two of them together. So one, I think, was shot at Waimea Bay, and the other, I think, was shot in Oregon somewhere, if I remember, because it's raining on that day. Keanu Reeves is actually getting wet. Yes. Standing on the beach, if I remember correctly. The rain is pelting down. And so that looked more like Oregon.
I think in the movie it's supposed to be Australia or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. It's supposed to be Bell's Beach, because they've got a little sign up saying, hey, it's Bell's Beach. But of course, it's nothing like Bell's Beach at all. And they didn't go to Bell's Beach. But I think, but we need to check with the guys who shot it. But I'm pretty sure, having looked at that crucial wave, it's two waves or two images, two separate shoots, two separate takes as well, which are all, stuck together. And it looks pretty good. It's all to do with angles and lighting, isn't it? But it's a really good film, of course, actually. But every now and then, I suppose you see the joins. But I didn't know that there was that. Yeah, of course, that does make sense. Let's leave the potential for sequel open. Yeah, bring back Patrick Swayze.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the legend, of a movie, of course, but legend that you didn't die on that wave, like you disappeared and you are somewhere. There are so many legends like this, like Elvis or Michael Jackson or whatnot. And
or of course, Mark Fu ultimately dying at Mavericks. I mean, I think that is a thing that everyone harks back to. And On again, ironically, a wave that I remember that after all this sort of conflict between Fu and Bradshaw, that they went together on, as they used to refer to it, the red eye plane over to the West Coast from Hawaii, because they had heard that, it was going to be an epic day of surf. And again, it wasn't that huge. It was sub-Waimea kind of level, but nevertheless, Fu came to grief, perhaps because of not knowing the wave as well as he knew Waimea, I suspect, actually.
But, I want to talk to you about the bad guys of surfing, because you were saying something about, the surfers dressing up with a bow tie, the tuxedo.
It doesn't happen very often, but yeah.
No, though, what came to my mind when you were talking is that at the beginning, of course, there is always like a connotation of surfers being outlaw, surfers being maybe criminal, even in Point Break, there is this criminal gang of surfers and whatnot.
Yeah, the bank robbers, yeah.
And there is as well, there were a lot of surfers that were like maybe acting like that in reality, okay, because surfing was a counterculture. But if you look at...
they weren't all acting, of course, yeah.
If you look at Fred Hemmings, and let's say the guys of Joey Cabell, the guys of the Duke, Paul Stroach, Joey Cabell, Fred Hemmings, who else was there? Butch Van Arsdalen,
Oh, right. Yeah, that era, yeah.
That era, let's say, you look at them, and they are all jacket, tie, shirt, gentlemen.
When they've got their clothes on, yeah, it's true.
Of course,
Fred Hemmings became senator or something, didn't he, if I remember? Was he a representative for Hawaii, yeah.
Senator. But before, when they were young and still like receiving prizes, talking about surf, they went also to California with the Duke, of showing what surf was and what surf could be, promoting surf culture and surf in general. They were all dressed well. By the way, the Duke himself, he was always super elegant.
Yeah, it's true. He became ambassador, didn't he, of Hawaii or something? Yeah.
So you have these bad guys of the, let's say, the generation of people that were like flying from California to Hawaii just to surf. They had no jobs. They were spending all the time on the beach. Maybe they were stealing something in order to afford to buy.
Or drug smuggling, of course, which is the big thing.
Those stories and some of real. Then you have an era where suddenly they all dress up with a tie.
They become professionals, you mean?
Become professional. They are like clean image, But and also is a time of the widget movie, most probably, and the surf culture goes beyond, what a few surfers on the water.
Becomes legitimate in some way, yeah.
Then you were telling me about the story of that move to Santa Monica, the time of Tony Alva, but that Tony Alva means at the time of Tony Alva, Jay Adams, at the time of Dogtown.
Right, yeah.
Dogtown was really, really, really counterculture of, we see it in the movies, we hear in the stories.
Right, sure.
People that were like very solid. So you're talking about, he was like an aristocratic but wanted to be a rebel. I think he found the good rebel guys around him, They were, even Peralta was there, and we see from the Lords of Dogtown movie, for instance, how fantastic stories you have, and then of course Jay Adams' story and whatnot, and so we go back to the rebel story of us as surfers, and I think maybe it was also Bunker Spretzel, right? Bunker.
Right. Yeah. Spretzel, I think. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. The wealthy guy who died young, I think. Yeah, you're thinking of him. I wouldn't compare him to Ted, actually. because Ted, in the period when I knew him, was super broke all the time because he had been disowned. So he was doing things like, pumping gas and serving as a waiter and all sorts of and then actually eventually became a student. Come to think of it, went to the University of Hawaii with some notion of becoming a lawyer, which never worked out because he would skip classes if ever there was a big swell coming in. But maybe that would have worked out in the end. I don't know. We'll never know. But the thing that we've left out here is, in talking about the romance of surfing, is the actual romance that on the ground, and he came to grief ultimately in an argument over a woman. Interestingly enough, because he phoned me up in the middle of the night when I was in London to tell me he'd met the perfect woman. He then, several months later, took me to see the perfect woman, who was a dancer in what was then known as was it exotic nightclub or exotic dancing? But we would call it pole dancing now, I think, actually. And so when I met her name was Lola. She was pretty much naked, but unfortunately, she was a wonderful woman, but she was also to the mind of the guy who ran the nightclub, she was his girlfriend, or at least he claimed some kind of ownership. So it was that kind of conflict in the end that brought him down, actually. Sadly. Conflict over a woman rather than a wave. But one can see some parallels there for sure.
He didn't have the money, but at least he had the culture, the education that came from again, we go back to the if you were listening to Churchill, I don't know how many people, even at that age, were listening to church at that time, were listening to church as a hobby, So
had a sense of the history for sure, actually, yeah.
And it's interesting to know. And then you have as well also those surfers, I don't know, David Nuaiva, that was seen in front of Larry Bertelman, singing in front of a Rolls Royce or a Bentley,
Yeah.
And definitely it was they were not owning the Bentleys or the Rolls, but it was that idea of kind of a surf aristocracy, if you want to, or not aristocracy, but very wealthy surfers, which maybe was not the truth because everyone was broke, but that's what they wanted to project,
Oh, perhaps Kelly Slater might have a view on that. I suppose, that it's possible, but I suppose it's, you wouldn't go into surfing with a view to, achieving affluence, I suspect, actually. There's something else that drives you, but maybe in the end, that certainly professional surfing became perhaps now, indeed, I suppose, with, surf movies, surf videos, and so on, surfers are always looking for an angle, aren't they? A way to enable them to keep surfing, actually, and pay the bills simultaneously. That's the great trick, isn't it?
Yeah,
that was the promise of professional surfing, that you wouldn't have to become a criminal as in Point Break. Oh, I know. We'll rob a bank. Then we'll carry on surfing. That you wouldn't have to rob a bank anymore or smuggle drugs, for example, that you could be legitimate. I don't know, but perhaps surfing still hasn't really fully of course, it's now in the Olympics. I'm not sure how successfully, and I was never myself all that much in favor of becoming that legitimate. I still like the notion of the rebel, the outsider, surfer as an outsider figure, I suppose, rather than, becoming part of the establishment all over again, becoming legitimate. In a way that seems wrong to me.
I know there is it's that part of the culture that is not, I don't want to say it's too clean, but has been kind of polished.
Yeah, that's there's been a bit of a gloss put on surfing. It's true, actually. Maybe, which is good for surfing, I guess. Actually, good for the image of surfing, and that's draw more people into.
I think this approach. I had the opportunity to talk with Fernando Aguirre, of course, the IAF president, and in Japan, for instance, the first time surfing was the Olympic, he created this village of showcasing with also part of his collection of surfboards, some of them Duke surfboards and other pictures and other things, art, to portraying what surf culture was.
Yeah.
And of course, because of COVID, there was no chance of doing that village, and portray what surf culture is. But I think it's important to be at the Olympic Games if there is a way for surf culture to be showcased and to be present, and not to dilute the message of
because certainly for me, surfing still is the kind of modern mythology and myth, madness, and murder. I suppose actually I still associate with. So I'm not sure I want it to be cleaned up too much. I still like the idea of surfing as a kind of form of piracy, really.
But look what happened, for instance, at the latest Olympic in Paris with breakdance. Breakdance that is. Counterculture as well, comes, people having street and having no money and dancing and whatnot, and suddenly gets into the Olympic Games for the first time and gets brutalized because of we don't understand. Is an athlete thing, is an expression thing, and by the way, and it was the first and last time that breakdance would be at the Olympics, because for the next Olympic Games in LA, when there will not be any more breakdance. And I think, that was a kind of balloon that inflated and popped, boom.
Yeah.
Made, I think, more damage to breakdance than benefit. I think,
Interesting.
I think, and I see Chopu wave in Tahiti that was a kind of appetizer, of what can be lower trestle in US, because surf is the sport of California, and there is like a huge community that lives and breathes surf every day, and I think maybe there is a form of expression that
I think I see what you mean, that surfing sort of was sanitized in some way by the Olympics. But, I still like that word that, I don't know, I guess surfers still use the insane wave. The kind of madness which is, I think, inherent in surfing. And I'd hate to see that kind of ironed out.
I have one last question for you.
Yeah, okay, sure.
The best wave of your life?
Best wave. Probably, the best wave that I surfed was probably Sunset Beach, I suspect, actually, which was, probably, because it was, okay. My kind of maximum height is still of a wave, is still under 10 foot. In fact, I always dreamed of the 20-foot wave, but really an 8-foot wave is probably about my maximum. And that was a Sunset Beach, which, and it's a pretty powerful beast of a wave, but that was probably, that probably was my best wave. But I do remember that I got sort of super confident. And, having, as one does every now and then, actually think, wow, okay, the gods are smiling on me now. And so I'm going again. And not what could possibly go wrong. I can remember, immediately after that is the dialectic of surfing, isn't it? That switch, the counterpoint from, wow, I'm on top of the wave, to the inevitable wipeout, where I was surfing the very same wave. And I had this, and I can recall thinking, oh, this is interesting. I'm surfing this wave upside down now. This wasn't part of the plan. That was... so the whole world turned, upside down for me at that point. But so that was a good day.
Of course, that's the most important thing. Good days are the one that make us, inspire for the future.
It was memorable for both those reasons, actually.
Thank you so much for being with me on this show.
Alessandro, that was such a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome, and one day maybe we'll see each other in person.
Bye, Alessandro.
Goodbye. Have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Hi, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed our today's episode. If you want to know more about us, please follow www.thetempleofsurf.com and all our social media. Mahalo!